Hey, it's Drybear. With its latest release, Dungeonborne has added a brand new mode to its game, which takes the dungeon delving genre to the next level. For the longest time, we've been craving a game like Dungeonborne that allows you to dive into dungeons where you explore, fight monsters, find loot, and try to escape alive. And most of the core gameplay revolves around facing off against these scary monsters and dangerous enemies, while also trying to avoid other players that are in the dungeon with you, trying to steal your loot or steal your opportunities, or potentially even take your escape instead of you. And while there's tons of fun to be had with the PvE and PvPvE inside of Dungeonborne, there's a lot of exploration that can be done in the pure PvP arena as well. And that's where the new mode Clotho's Trial comes in. It reminds me a lot of old school Dark Messiah, Heroes of Might and Magic arenas, or even MMO arenas, where you will face off 3 versus 3 in small arena areas in pure PvP combat. And they've made a real spectacle of the feature as well. You will enter in by using either gold or these consumable items that you collect through daily activities, and you'll enter in and do a whole bunch of arena matches against other players, and as you win more and more, you'll unlock more and more of this gate here, and when you open all of them, it has a special animation. And it has seriously tested my skills, but also made me think a lot about what classes I want to play in the game, because usually when you're delving into one of the dungeons in Dungeonborne, regardless of the map, you're focusing on how you can maximize your survivability and how you can maximize your ability to grab loot and deal with other players while escaping at the same time. But in Clotho's Trial, everything gets flipped on its head, and you see a whole new side of the game that really brings the PvP of it to life. In 3v3 settings, it care a lot about the team comps and the different combinations you can make with the classes on your team, and you think a lot about the abilities that they use as well. I noticed when I first started playing Clotho's Trial that I was just kind of playing it normally how I would play Dungeonborne, but I was very shocked by how people were intuitively and ingenuitively using characters in the game to create some really interesting opportunities. So using Druid to spawn the tree inside of short corridors to block people off, and then using multiple Druids in a team comp to try and rush someone down. You get a little bit of this in the 3v3 team side queues for Dungeonborne, but not to the same effect. And it also means that you can bring special flasks into the fight, and you know where the fight's going to take place, and you know it's going to take place, and you also know there's going to be no PvE monsters that are going to interrupt. And so you create these really unique opportunities to use the different weapons and skill sets that the classes have in the game to their fullest. It also brought some weapons that I had previously thought were quite poor in the overall game mode back into the fray, because they give you a lot of options for playing in Clotho's Trial that are primarily effective against players, but not so useful against PvE monsters. Another cool aspect about Clotho's Trial is it's equalized. So when you load into a round for the first time, you will have a list of all purple gear that you can choose from, all the main stats you want, so you can activate whatever passive your class has that makes the most sense for you. And there will be a table full of consumables, bandages, mana potions, health potions, shield potions as well to keep yourself stable, and also one of each of these special flasks: incendiary flasks, smoke screen flasks, even the wall flasks that create the rock walls in front of people, which means that you get an opportunity to play through all of these with equal gear to face off against players and create a unique arena style experience. And as I went through, I noticed I developed a brand new love for some of the classes that I had written off that didn't really interest me that much, because they're so useful in this style of arena combat in areas that make the most sense. And it also sharpened my skills a lot in using the classes that I play most, because I get to test them against players that are really gunning for you with no other distractions. I think the pacing is so much different than normal game mode action of the PvPvE, because most people are kind of playing it slow, playing it stealthy. Sometimes they go for rushes if you're in 2s or 3s, but in solos, it's not quite as aggressive as this, and you're usually trying to get through your loot, get everything you can, whereas this is high octane, full on from the beginning, right in your face, and you have so many different ways to interact with people with different elevations and different encounter opportunities and combos with players as well. I've encountered triple Druid teams that tried to block me and my team in using 3 trees and then going into the Panther form. I've encountered Pyromancer teams that tried to force you in a corner and then drop fireballs into that corner as well. Teams with a fighter up front and then a Swordmaster that flanks and a rogue that sneaks up from behind, or if they just go for a buff with shielding potions and try to rush you down in in melee, trying to take out caster teams. I've even seen full caster teams having only casters in it, and all of those play drastically different from each other and give you different chances to play in new ways. Now, I think there's a lot of opportunity for new maps in the new mode, Cloos Trial, because the one that's there does feel a little bit linear. You have your main path from the spawn that has 2 exits from it. This main path follows up this upper branch you're seeing right now, and it goes to the enemy spawn, and the map is incredibly small, as it should be, so that people don't hide and run away for too long. Then you have an interior portion of the map that you can actually move into, and the doors are closed by default, so you will have to go through the animation to unlock them and get inside, and it creates more opportunities for people to block the things at doors or funnel enemies into the Gates of Thermopylae situation, where you can actually deal a bunch of AoE damage to targets that are right up in front of you. Which I noticed as I got more and more into the trial, which as you win, you face more teams that are winning, and it gets harder and harder to get your win streak and keep it. But I've noticed that it started becoming very samey with the classes choices that people were playing. There was a meta being established, and I think having different kinds of maps that some are more open or maybe longer, or maybe even with more space or elevation that allows people to play in different ways would be awesome. Even rotating maps would be super cool. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for this mode in the future as they continue to add more development and more map content adding to the game. Makes it a lot more interesting to play because you'll have new ways to play, and you might even be able to change your class or change your build or change your comp in order to fit the situation that you're in. And I like to finish out by showcasing a round here that shows what Cloos Trial is all about. I love the fact that you can load in and specify your own gear and your own stats, and I think it's very important that in PvP like this that's fixed, that it's as close to equal as possible, because then it's more about the player's skill and their ingenuity rather than just their gear that makes the big difference, which is more like the normal game mode that you'll be experiencing. I played around a bunch with using all of the different flasks types. I think the smoke screen is probably one of the best, and there's a lot of really cool abilities that generally don't get as much use in the normal game mode that stand out a lot in this. You can see that we're against a Druid rush comp, which ended up becoming quite popular. Well, you run 2 Druids, you double tree, you go Panther, and you go for the kill, which takes out a lot of damage. You can actually even just push into the spawn to burn people down really fast. So we reset, we try again, we make sure that we're bubbled up and try to get some better usage out of this. I noticed a lot of the Cryomancers were using the single target slow dot that you could use, but I wanted to try and find some value in using the Frost Storm. The problem with the Frost Storm is it takes a little bit while to speed up and actually start activating, and generally in solo play or in the normal PvP mode, you'd use a line of sight and other things like that. But what I like about it is it has not only good damage and some good offensive capabilities, but it also has some crowd control as well, and you can block areas. You can see here, as my teammate here, the fighter got jumped on, I was able to put the Frost Storm down with a Lightning Storm right on top of my teammate. So the enemy that was going towards it had basically no choice either to try and get the kill or suffer the AoE damage that I had in that area, and with the slowing from the Frost Storm, had a tough time getting out alive, and we ended up getting that kill there. And as I played more and more, I started getting shocked by the kind of gameplay that I was seeing from other players. I was actually kind of most afraid of casters like Pyromancers and Cryomancers from a distance, but I started facing a couple good fighters and Swordmasters that were excellent at using their ranged weapons or their flown swords, and I ended up being kind of scared that they would get a really nice snipe or pick around the corner to do a bunch of damage to me right as I peeked out to cast a spell. And the best teams I faced would take advantage of this. You can see that the enemy fighter is going to peek out and shoot at me with a crossbow from across the map, and you can see how much damage it actually does to peck at me. And so they would actually switch between close range, long range, close range, long range, and they would spread out and use the map in really interesting ways to try and force us into a corner or force us to play defensively when we didn't really have the advantage on them. When I first thought it was going to be a casters and rogues paradise, as you'd see in a lot of MMOs, I ended up facing a good amount of Zerg comps that included Death Knights with really high burst damage, even multiple Swordmasters in some cases, and a lot of very skilled fighters that would end up using their full range of weapons to burst you down quite quickly. And while I'm certainly not the best, it has highlighted a lot of flaws in my personal playstyle when it comes to PvP and Dungeonborne that has taught me a lot on how to be better in the other modes, and I think the modes do enhance each other. You have to farm up the gold to get the entry into Cloos Trial. You can't just enter in for free, and it teaches you a lot about PvP and makes you better at it as well. And it also got me excited about the other classes in the game and had me switching up and going to different classes and trying new opportunities. You can say, okay, well, that works excellent in Cloos Trial. I kind of want to try try that as a different class there. And it makes me excited to see new classes coming into the game that might switch up not only the normal game mode meta, but also the PvP meta as well. And it's important to highlight that when you start Clotho's Trial, you actually are given all of the best gear that you can get at purple quality to give you the option of activating any of your passive skills. So you have options for all of the main stats that a character might need: strength, dexterity, stamina, intelligence, will, and faith. And if you didn't know, in Dungeonborne, when you have enough of these stats, you activate different passive stats for your class depending on your build and preference. So you may want to get a whole bunch of stamina so that you can activate the fighter's unique passive weapon masteries that when you use your Q ability, whichever one you decide to run with, you gain a shield for your duration. So you may actually want to run stamina, you may want to run strength to get some extra damage out, maybe you want to have a slow applied with hamstring on the target, and also it changes up which abilities you use as well. The whirlwind ability for warrior was extremely effective at dealing damage to close targets that didn't really have a way to get away. So especially when you put a slow on the whirlwind and get on top of like a pyromancer, for example, and when their knockback blast is on cooldown, you could very easily burn down their HP without them being able to escape or get away from it if they don't have teammates to support them. There are also some builds that you would build for some of the basic PvP encounters, and also just having some fights with other teams when you're inside of a delve diving into a dungeon that priest would be able to excel at. So the opportunities for you to be able to use things like divine guidance, which pulses holy light, which heals teammates and does damage to enemies, kind of like what we talked about earlier with the ice storm for the cryomancer. Those opportunities are constant in Clotho's Trial, which means that abilities like this are huge. And in some cases, you can group up as well and have some nice coordination with your teammates. You could actually run something like a rogue, use petrifying poison, which petrifies the target, which means they can't take damage, but they can't do anything either. It's a hard CC that you can apply to the target. And so if you coordinate, you can actually make it for a short period of time a 3v2 if you're using the petrifying poison intelligently. And even though Pyromancer only has 2 abilities in the current patch right now, both of them are extremely effective. I have been forced into a corner by high stage level of Pyroblast. So this one is a fireball that you charge up from the Pyromancer. The longer you charge it, the more powerful it gets. And since you can hide behind a wall and you know where the enemies are most of the time, you can charge it up and launch it as you come around the corner to do a big bunch of damage. And the other ability that's super useful in so many different ways is Fire Blast. This one will knock enemies back away from you, so it's great at getting melee enemies off of you if you're stuck in a melee situation, but it's also good at the higher elevation portions of Clotho's Trial, or as they're up on a ledge, you can knock them down, which means they have to waste some time having to run around and come back up, which is crazy effective in some situations. I didn't think the Death Knight was going to be all that great at Clotho's Trial, but boy was I wrong. Not only does Death Knight have a lot of AoE opportunities with both of the Q skills that the Death Knight can run, if you can land Grasp of the Grave, you can do some ridiculous things, because this is actually just a death grip. You can grab an enemy player and pull them towards you, which obviously has implications for a melee class that wants to have targets up close so you can actually deal good damage to them. But on top of that, again, just like I mentioned with the Fire Blast for the Pyromancer, it means that you can pull enemies down that are above you. So if they're above on a ledge and they're trying to snipe at you from a distance, you can grab them and pull them off that ledge and get them stuck somewhere, or you can even use it to knock people off if you're very careful about your positioning. Frost Barrier is an obvious choice for Cryomancers in this mode because you become immune while you have it and you recover HP at the same time. But what I found to be extremely effective as well is Frostbite Curse. This is a single target dot and slow on a target. It doesn't do a crazy amount of damage, and the damage it does ticks rather slowly, but is a long duration slow, which is very effective at keeping targets within range for both you and your teammates. Swordmaster is an interesting one because just like Pyromancer, they currently have 2 skills available, one for each slot, and they do have to have weapons on hand, like swords on hand that they can use to activate their abilities. So they have to be a little bit more cautious about how they throw out their abilities, but they have lots of burst potential as well. And of course, if you can get someone stuck in a spot, slow them down or make them easy to hit, and they can hit their psionic blades very accurately, they can do crazy burst damage. They also have some nice passives where if you fill out your stamina, you get a 50% damage reduction while you're doing whirling blades. So if you see an enemy about to use a burst ability like a Pyromancer or even a Swordmaster and they're coming right up on top of you, you can pop deflection with whirling blades and avoid the damage there, which is super clutch. And they also also have some really nice burst damage where they can use psionic blades on a target for big burst damage, the throw over here, and then that gives them 5 seconds of 50% crit chance if they stack up their dexterity ability, which means that they can use psionic blades to burst a target, get close, and then burst them even more with some melee crits. Of course, we saw a lot of the power of Druid in PvP as well, a lot of flexibility and utility, as well as good single target damage. One of the most clutch uses of Force of Nature was being able to put the tree behind targets and force them to either destroy the tree, the treant that you summon behind them, or force them to attack you, but they're still taking damage from the treant. And because it has collision, you can use a lot of things to block people into a corner, and I even did this a little bit with Cryomancer, switching over into the frost barrier, ice blocking myself, and then blocking people from escaping or preventing their routes or flanking if they're trying to go after my teammates. But also opened the opportunity for very consistent use of support abilities and healing as well, which is great. We did see some druids that were using regrowth, which is a heal over time on targets, and you can also run with a full stamina build here that allows you to get nature's breath, which means that regrowth adds a shield to the target. So you can regrowth a target, shield them, and give them a heal over time, which is super clutch. The priest's divine protection spell allows them to absorb all damage for a nearby target, and they can run cleanse as well to do some major healing on the target if they get jumped on. And there's some situations, as you can imagine, as we talked about with frost barrier and even the deflection from the Swordmaster, but a very well-placed, well-timed divine protection from a priest can completely shut down the onslaught from an oncoming team that really wanted to try and go for a burst comp. So if you haven't already, pick up Dungeonborne. It is a ton of fun and now includes even more gameplay variety than ever before, and has a lot of really interesting interactions and gameplay experiences that you can have from one single game. It is so worth it. Check it out. And as always, if you'd like to see more Dungeonborne style content, let me know in the comments down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.